Today's lesson is a hunger artist. Hi, everybody. I'm Roger.
Hello, I'm Kiki.
And today we're going to give you a summary of an old story written by Franz Kafka and published way back in 1922 entitled A Hunger Artist. Now, we've all heard about a hunger strike, for example. That's when somebody refuses to eat food because they're protesting something. But in this particular case, this person in the story is actually doing this as a kind of performance.
I mean, Roger, I've heard of a hungry artist because usually it's really hard for artists to make money off of their art. So what are we going to be talking about today?
Well, we'll find out as we talk about the synopsis of our article for today. It's a hunger artist, so let's find out what this is all about. Let's listen to the first part, and we'll be right back to discuss it.
A hunger artist. Once upon a time, there were special entertainers called hunger artists, who, to the delight of crowds everywhere, would go weeks without eating. They would slowly grow thinner as people came and went, day after day, to watch the strange spectacle of suffering.
大家好，第一部分我们来介绍名词 spectacle， 它的意思是奇观、有趣的场面，或是壮观的景象，也可以是精彩的表演。例如 The film was advertised as an amazing Hollywood spectacle. 这部电影被宣传为令人惊叹的好莱坞奇观。又或者说 The newspaper review said the show was a spectacle not to be missed. 报纸上的评论表示这场秀是一场不容错过的精彩表演。再来我们看到名词 suffering. 这个字的意思是痛苦、折磨或是苦难。例如Around the world, hunger causes much suffering. 在世界各地，饥饿引起许多苦难。或是 Cynthia wants to become a doctor in order to take away people's suffering. Cynthia 想要成为一位医生，来解除人们的苦难。
Okay, so the first part of our lesson begins by saying, once upon a time, there were special entertainers called hunger artists who, to the delight of crowds everywhere, would go weeks without eating. Now, in the old days, they used to have these performances, usually at the circus. You could go to a freak show or something like that and see these strange or unusual things, like maybe women with beards or people with two heads or something like that. We don't really have those freak shows anymore. But back in the days, or a long time ago, once upon a time, there were these special entertainers, and they were called hunger artists. And they would go weeks without eating. If that made you really thrilled to go see someone starving themselves to death, then you could go buy a ticket and check it out.
To the delight of crowds everywhere means that all these visitors and tourists, they would be able to come and see these special hunger artists. They would go weeks without eating. So when you go weeks without doing something, or when you go weeks doing something, means that you can spend a lot of time focusing or just doing one thing. So I could go weeks eating noodles because I really enjoy eating noodles.
Me too. I like spaghetti and noodles and things like that. And in this particular case, though, people would go weeks without eating. And this again happened once upon a time. That is a phrase we often use to begin a story, especially a children's story or a fairy tale. So once upon a time, there was a fairy who lived in the magic forest, blah, blah, blah. And in this particular case, once in the past, there were special entertainers who would starve themselves. They would go on long fasts. We call that a fast when you're not eating. And they did this for entertainment. And they would slowly grow thinner as people came and went. So again, they're at this freak show or at some kind of carnival or something like that. And people would come and they would go. They would pass by and look at the person who has not been eating for 40 days.
Day after day, people would watch the strange spectacle of suffering. So for many days, people might come back to this freak show or this circus, and just to see how skinny this hunger artist gets. They would just see them get thinner and thinner And for some strange reason, people enjoyed watching this spectacle of suffering. They're watching these hunger artists lose weight every day, turning into bone and skin. And a spectacle is usually something that you see that is so out of the norm, and it's just so different that it's very strange.
Right, a spectacle, something to look at that is very unusual or strange. And this would happen day after day, which means one day followed by another day, followed by another day. And that implies that it just goes on like this day after day after day. For example, some people hate the weather in Canada. Oh, it's cold during the winter day after day. It just never gets warm. We have to freeze all the way from November until March or so when it starts to get warmer. So indeed, people would come and go day after day to watch this strange spectacle, this unusual sight. And it's the unusual sight of someone suffering. If you refuse to eat, of course, you're going to be very hungry all the time and you're going to be suffering. If you're in great pain, for example, you're going to suffer a lot. And of course, it's going to be very difficult to go through life day by day. Okay, that brings us to the end of the first part of our lesson for today. Let's move on now to the second part and continue with our summary.
One such hunger artist was particularly famous, attracting massive crowds everywhere he went. To ensure that he wasn't cheating by sneaking hidden food, the locals would even assign observers to watch him all night long. But this was completely unnecessary. Truth be told, fasting was the easiest thing in the world for the artist. He had no need to cheat. Perhaps that was why he was always so disappointed when the townspeople didn't trust him.
第二部分我们看到动词 sneak， 它的意思是偷拿、偷带或是潜行、偷偷溜走。例如 John tried to sneak some snacks into his bedroom, although his mom told him not to eat before sleeping. 尽管 John 的妈妈叫他睡前不要吃东西，他还是试着偷偷的携带一些零食进房间。又或者说 The boys tried to sneak into the movie theater without paying for tickets. 那些男孩们试图不买票，偷溜进电影院。再来我们看到动词 assign， 这个字的意思是指派、分派工作或是分配。例如 The teacher didn't assign us any homework for the weekend. 老师没有指派我们任何周末作业。或是 The team leader assigned tasks to everybody. 那位组长为所有人指派了任务。另外补充这个字的名词 assignment， A-S-S-I-G-N-M-E-N-T assignment。 例如 Sue has been working on the assignment all day. Sue 已经花了一整天的时间在做作业。再举一个例子 You must have your spelling and grammar checked before handing in your assignment. 你一定要在缴交你的作业之前确认过拼字和文法都正确。再来我们看到形容词 disappointed， 这个字的意思是失望的、沮丧的或是灰心的。例如 Jenny was disappointed after she lost the contest. Jenny 输掉比赛后感到非常失望。或是 I was disappointed to hear that you won't be joining us tonight. 听到你今晚不能和我们同行，让我很失望。
Okay, we just heard the second part of our synopsis. So here it says, one such hunger artist was particularly famous, attracting massive crowds everywhere he went. So there was one person, one artist in particular. There was a hunger artist. He was really famous, and he would travel everywhere where he would be able to attract a large crowd to come and just to see him.
And I should mention here, the word crowd is tricky. It refers to one group of people. So if you talk about crowds, you're talking about different groups of people in different places. You're not talking about the individual people in the crowd. So if you go to one place and give a concert, you could say, oh, there's a big crowd here tonight to see the May Day concert. And in this particular case, though, he went to different places and attracted massive crowds in those different places. Now, to ensure that he wasn't cheating by sneaking hidden food, the locals would even assign observers to watch him all night long. So here we've got the verb to sneak, which means that you secretly do something. You could sneak into someone's house, for example, if you want to scare them or if you want to steal something. Of course, we don't condone such behavior. It's just an example here. But, of course, people did not want to see him cheating by sneaking food into his cage or wherever he was. And yes, indeed, if he did that, then he would be cheating.
It's really interesting to think that the crowds or the audience would care that he would cheat and eat food. Like, they really wanted to see him suffer by not eating. That's really weird for me. But anyway, the locals, they will hire people or assign observers to watch him all night long. So when you assign somebody to do something or when you assign homework to students, you're giving somebody a task to do or you're giving somebody a job to do.
Exactly. And the locals there in these different places would give jobs to observers. They would assign those observers to watch him all night long. An observer is somebody who observes something. They just keep on watching to make sure the situation is under control. And they would do this all night long. I think they had different teams. They would rotate. But this was completely unnecessary. They did not need to do this. Truth be told, or you could say to tell the truth, fasting was the easiest thing in the world for the artist. He had no need to cheat. So, yes, indeed, truth be told. That's just a fancy way of saying to tell the truth, to tell you the truth, to not fool you, to not lie to you. We're just going to come out and tell you the truth. Fasting was really easy for him. Again, fasting is when you don't eat food. Nowadays, there's this popular method of losing weight. The 16-8 fasting.
Intermittent fasting.
Intermittent fasting, yes, indeed. Lots of people do that to be healthy or to lose weight. But fasting was a pretty easy thing for him to do, so he did not need to cheat at all.
Truth be told, he did not need to cheat, probably because he didn't have access to a lot of food either.
Could be, right? He could have been really poor and just couldn't buy the food. And perhaps that was why he was always so disappointed when the townspeople didn't trust him. If you're disappointed, that means you feel sad because something did not happen. It might be because someone did not keep their promise, so you feel disappointed. You were supposed to buy me a souvenir when you went to Japan, and you didn't buy me anything. I'm so disappointed.
A lot of students, they're scared to disappoint their parents, so they always try to do their best and get good grades.
And they don't try to cheat on those tests because they might get caught and they might get in trouble. And he was disappointed because the townspeople in these different towns did not trust him. They thought, hey, he might be cheating, so let's have some observers watch him all night long. And he felt, oh, I'm so disappointed. Why do they need to do that? Why don't they believe me? Okay, that brings us to the end of the second part of our lesson for today. Let's listen now to the third part. Pay attention because it is a little long.
The artist had a manager who had a rule that the artist would never starve for more than 40 days. Contrary to what one might assume, this 40-day rule wasn't intended to protect the artist, but rather was followed simply because audiences always seemed to grow bored after 40 days. The artist found this frustrating. He knew he could last much longer, but he was being held back by his patrons. Thus, he grew gloomy, angry at the people for stopping him from proving what a magnificent hunger artist he could be.
第三部分我们看到形容词 frustrating 这个字的意思是令人沮丧的、灰心的或是让人懊恼的。例如 The video game was too frustrating for George 这个电玩游戏让 George 太挫折了。或是 Danny found it frustrating that his computer couldn't connect to the internet Danny 的电脑无法连上网络，让他觉得很烦躁。最后我们看到形容词 magnificent 指的是杰出的、极好的、宏伟的或是壮丽的。举例来说 You can see magnificent works of art in museums in Rome 在罗马的博物馆里，你可以看到杰出的艺术作品。最后一个例子 We climbed the mountain so we could see the magnificent view from the top 我们爬上山，以便从山顶欣赏壮观的景色。
Okay, we're continuing with our synopsis. Remember where we left off. The hunger artist was disappointed that townspeople in different towns had to hire observers to keep a watch on him all night long because fasting was natural to him, so he didn't think it was necessary. And here in the final part, it says the artist had a manager who had a rule that the artist would never starve for more than 40 days. So if you're a performing artist, or if you're an artist or whatever, you might have a manager or an agent or whoever who takes care of you. And this particular manager had a rule. And this manager said, you cannot starve yourself for more than 40 days. Otherwise, we might get in trouble or you might get sick and die.
And usually having a manager would be having a person that will look out for your best interests. They'll make sure that you're being taken care of when you go to work. And in this case, I think it's very important because although the hunger artist is trying to show his art and trying to show everyone his suffering, the manager still wants to protect him and make sure he doesn't get sick. And eventually, he's not going to be able to perform.
Exactly. So the manager needs to take care of that person so they can both be making money. And you don't want to starve that person for longer than 40 days. To starve, of course, means to lack food and you feel very, very hungry. Oh, I've been working all morning. I'm starving. When can I have lunch? And contrary to what one might assume, this 40-day rule wasn't intended to protect the artist, but rather was followed simply because audiences always seem to grow bored after 40 days. So contrary to what you might assume, contrary to means the opposite of what you might be thinking. So we're thinking that, okay, the manager is making him starve for only 40 days. So that's probably because he wants to make sure he's healthy and safe. But contrary to that idea, actually the opposite of that idea, opposite to what you might assume or what you might think is the case without investigating, it wasn't intended to protect the artist, but they did it because the audiences would get bored after 40 days. So yeah, it was basically to keep those people coming in, and it seems like the manager didn't really care about the artist, whether he starved to death or not.
Right. So the manager really only cared if the audiences were still being entertained by this hunger artist. So he didn't care what happened to him if he continued to starve after 40 days. And all he wants is just for more audience to come. The artist found this frustrating. He knew he could last much longer, but he was being held back by his patrons. So the artist actually wants to starve for more than 40 days. He actually wants to keep going. So he was really frustrated because his manager wouldn't let him because the audience would get bored. So frustrating is when you get really anxious or very unhappy about not being able to get something or do something that you want the way you want to do it. And when somebody is stopping you from doing something, it will get you or make you really frustrated. Like when somebody tells me I can't eat French fries because it's too starchy, I get really frustrated because I love French fries.
Exactly. French fries are probably unhealthy if you eat them too often. But in any case here, it was frustrating. He thought, why do I have to eat something every 40 days? I can actually fast for much longer than that. It does say he knew he could last much longer, but he was being held back by his patrons. If you're held back, somebody keeps you from moving forward, okay? So maybe, for example, if you're in school and you're in the 5th grade and you don't do so well, you might be held back a year. You will not be allowed to go to the 6th grade. You'll have to repeat the 5th grade. That could be very frustrating. You'll have to make friends all over again. But in this particular case, he was being held back. He was being restrained by his patrons. A patron, of course, is somebody who goes to see your performance and they pay money for tickets. Those are your patrons. Anybody who frequents a business and goes to a business or store and buys things, that is a patron as well. And yes, indeed, he was being held back by his patrons. He thought, hey, I could do so much better if it weren't for this stupid rule.
And sometimes we can also use held back or to hold back your feelings towards something. So when somebody held back their feelings or held back their sadness, they're really keeping their feelings inside. So held back can also be used to describe the feeling of not being able to show your emotions outwards.
I should also mention that the word patron can mean a couple other things. It could mean the person who is sponsoring you as well, which I believe is what it's referring to here. But again, patron can also be somebody who is a customer at a store or a restaurant or whatever. And the next sentence goes on to say, thus or therefore, he grew gloomy, angry at the people for stopping him from proving what a magnificent hunger artist he could be. So he grew gloomy. He became gloomy, which means you're pretty sad, you're upset. And indeed, he thought that he could fast much longer, so he became gloomy. And then he started to get angry at the people, his manager, and maybe his customers as well. He became angry at them for stopping him from proving what a magnificent hunger artist he could be. If you're magnificent, that means you're really, really great. This is related to the word magnify, which means to make something bigger, especially if you look through a special lens like a magnifying glass. So he's a magnificent hunger artist. He's a really big, huge, colossal, outstanding, fantastic hunger artist. He just wasn't being allowed to realize his potential.
And that comes to the end of today's synopsis. Let's listen to our Chinese teacher, Henny.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。故事第二部分提到一位特别有名的饥饿艺术家，所到之处都吸引大批群众。为了确保他没有作弊偷藏食物，当地人甚至会指派观察员整晚看守他。好，那文中是用动词 assign 来表达指派的意思。我们来学它的字首字根。首先 sign 这个字根呢，它有标记、指示、符号或者是签署的意思。那么在 assign 这个字当中，它的字首 as 是来自 ad 表示朝向，那么字根 sign 表示标记。同学们可以试着想象，当你就拿着一张纸一张单子，然后针对每个人标记各自要分配的数量啊，或者是工作，这样应该不难联想到 assign 它有指派或是分配的意思。好，我们顺便补充两个有相同字根的单字。第一个 signify 它的字根 sign 是标示的意思，那么 ify 是动词字尾。我们把某事物特别标示出来，那就是为了要标示出它的重要性啊，或者是要说明它的含义等等。用这样的方式应该可以联想到 signify 它有意味着或者是表示的那种意思。它其实还可以表达要紧很重要，只是这个意思啊常常用在否定句或疑问句里。It doesn't signify 就跟 it doesn't matter 意思差不多。好，第二个补充的是 resign， 它的字首 re 表示相反， sign 表示标记。那什么叫做相反标记呢？其实这个字是有典故的，它原本在拉丁文里面是指在账簿上面画反记号来核销原先的注记，那么后来就引申出辞职的意思了。好，同样在课文第二部分最后一句他写道Perhaps that was why he was always so disappointed when the townspeople didn't trust him. 或许那就是为什么当镇上居民不信任他时，他总是那么失望。句子里面用到 that was why 主词加动词来表达，那就是为什么怎么样怎么样，那就是什么什么的原因。我们来补充相关的用法。Why 以及其他代表是疑问词，像是 what、who、when、where 等等，可以引导名词子句，然后在句中当作主词、受词或者是主词补语用。当作主词补语用时呢，就是用来补充说明主词的内容，让语义完整。它常见的用法就是用主词加 be 动词，加上 why 或是 where 或者是 how， 再加主词，再加动词，去表达说什么什么就是点点点的原因、地点或是方式。那我们就来造3个例句。This is where we practice dancing. 这就是我们练舞的地方。或是说That's how they met. 那就是他们相遇的方式。 That's why I didn't call you back. 那就是我没有回你电话的原因。那这边我们在 be 动词后面就是用这个 WH 疑问词引导的句子来当主词补语用，去补充说明咯。好，那么以上是今天重点整理，我们来回顾今天的单字吧。
Spectacle. The fireworks display was an amazing spectacle. Sneak. The child tried to sneak a piece of candy from his mom's handbag. Assign. The teacher assigned Hugo the job of cleaning the blackboard. Observer. The researcher acted as an observer during the experiment, taking notes on the subject's responses. Disappointed. Joy was disappointed to learn that her favorite restaurant went out of business. Frustrating. It's really frustrating when you forget your umbrella on a rainy day. Gloomy. Mr. Davis seems quite gloomy since the death of his dog. Magnificent. The walls of the home were decorated with magnificent paintings.
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Roger.
I am Kiki.
See you next time.